Ugly Duckling Oboes is dedicated to the development of young oboe players. They provide quality handmade oboe reeds, private lessons, and high-quality oboe sales, rentals, and consignments. The oboes that they rent are conservatory mechanism oboes that include the left-hand F key and low B-flat key. All are maintained by oboe-specific technicians. In-person lessons are available as well as virtual lessons for students who live outside the geographic area or have transportation or schedule challenges. They also offer online college audition coaching for high school juniors and seniors who plan to audition to be music majors. Visit uglyducklingoboes.com for more details on how you can set yourself up for success and sign up for their newsletter. Thank you for your support, Ugly Duckling Oboes.
Hey oboists! Have you ever found it difficult to sort out when and how to find a new oboe or English horn? Oboe Chicago streamlines the process, providing personal and professional consultation and a large selection of lovely instruments. The process feels comfortable and thorough. Selection includes Effleuré of Paris, Howarth of London, Covey Oboes, and Fox products. For a current listing of Oboe Chicago's selection, please visit www.oboechicago.com. For a credit of $100 towards shipping, mention Double Reed Dish when you call or email Shauna. That's oboechicago.com.
Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz.
And I'm Jackie Wilson. And you're listening to Double Reed Dish,
a podcast for oboists,
bassoonists,
and the people who love them.
What's up?
Well, it's a good day because I'm talking to you. We decided to wistfully dish about some fun music-related travel stories. And we got some really fun submissions on our social media. So I guess I'll just go ahead and give you mine first. Although compared to these ones, mine is super lame. I was in my undergrad in Connecticut, which is only, where I was in Hartford was only a couple hours from Boston. So my studio mates and I, this must have been in like 2004 or 2005, something like that. There was a small studio and we were all really close. And we decided to drive to Boston to hear John Ferrillo, the principal oboist of the Boston Symphony, play the Strauss Concerto. And I remember we got there like barely in time because we underestimated the Boston traffic/parking situation. And I remember flying in, like literally they were closing the doors to the hall. And I was like, wait. I just like scooted in right at the end and we found a seat, and then immediately he came out on stage and started playing, and we were like, oh my God. It was extremely stressful, but very rewarding. Do you have any fun travel stories, music related, that?
Well, I was going to tell one, but now your story of traveling specifically to see a concert reminded me of something I had totally forgotten. And I actually can't believe I'm about to talk about this on the Double Reed podcast with all this oboe listenership. But
yes.
So when Chris and I first started dating, and well, he's older than me, but I was a young undergrad. I was okay, I'm going to preface this and defend myself a little bit. I was very green. I did not know anything about classical music. I had not had a private lesson before college. So I did not come up in youth orchestra listening to the Western canon, none of that. So please don't laugh at me too hard, but y'all are going to laugh at me.
I'm going to laugh at you, definitely.
So we were in school at Eastern on the east side of Washington State, and we traveled to hear the Seattle Symphony. And I was like super stoked. And they were playing this great program of works that I'd heard of, but were not familiar with, which included the Emperor Concerto and Symphonie Fantastique. And so we're listening to Symphonie Fantastique. Of course, I'm loving it.
Oh my God.
Then I was not familiar with the offstage oboe English horn call and response. And And so I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with the principal oboe? Like, why did he get up and leave? Like, that's so unprofessional. Maybe he broke a reed. Maybe he had to go to the bathroom. I thought something had gone like disastrously wrong, and someone had to play it from backstage.
I'm crying.
I'm crying too because I hadn't even thought of this. It just came to my mind as you were talking.
You're like, this is a really lame way to play the solo.
I was like, I thought I was about to hear some of the best music being made in the Pacific Northwest, and this principal oboe just gets up in the middle of this piece that I traveled for. Oh my God. I'm literally crying. Oh my gosh.
I never thought of that before.
I had no idea what was happening. So I just made up my own.
What did Chris do?
I don't know. He probably just took my lead. Like, I don't even remember, but then you have to remember he came back, obviously. And so I thought, oh, everything's fine. And must have figured it out and finished the rest of the work. Oh.
So my question is, what happened? By the way, your husband just texted me, what is happening?
He's just hearing me like scream laugh from the other room. Listen, Brene Brown would give me some vulnerability points right now, so I'm just... So
when you learned about the symphony in history class, was there like an aha moment?
Like, it's a big deal to you guys, but in studying the symphony, you know, you talk about program music, and usually you do the March to the Scaffold and probably the Witch's Sabbath, but you don't do the third movement. So I didn't realize what was going on until I played it in grad school. And then I kept my mouth shut real quick and acted like I knew what was going on the whole darn time. So yes, please and thank you. Oh yes, very normal.
Oh my God, that is the most hilarious thing I've ever heard in my life.
It doesn't really have to do with travel, but I did have to travel to Seattle to learn.
Oh my God, thank you so much for sharing that. You made my entire day.
Well, enough about me. We have listener submissions to get to. We probably shouldn't belabor this point too long, you know. What do our listeners have to say about travel?
Well, we got this very wonderful submission from Stephanie, and I'll just read it in her words. So last year I traveled to India to teach at Shanti Bhavan. I was petrified to travel 20 hours away with my bassoon. On the way back from India, I got stopped in the Bangalore airport in security. They thought my bassoon was a gun, and the security man was trying to open my case upside down. I naturally screeched, and I opened the case for them. After many minutes of arguing, the head of security came over, took one look at my bassoon, and said, "Oh, a guitar! That's fine." Honestly, at least he didn't call it an oboe.
A guitar. That's a new one.
A guitar. It's new. Mm-hmm.
I've gotten oboe, bass, and bass clarinet, but not guitar. But
that's a good one.
Jillian says, when the National Youth Orchestra of Canada was traveling back from a tour of Japan and Hong Kong, I was one of the first people to go through the security line at the airport. The agent kept looking through my bag, of course, opened my oboe case, and I was holding my breath, thinking, please don't take it out of the case. He managed to ask me if it was a clarinet, and I said, no, oboe. Side note, this is from Jillian. When language is a barrier with a security agent, just say yes, it is a clarinet. Back to the story. So he finally said, okay, you play. So I assembled it in front of him, and the entire line of orchestra members behind me played a few notes, to which he said, keep going. From the back of the line, someone called out, Don Juan. It was suddenly excerpt request hour. Luckily, we had plenty of time at the airport because it seemed like most of the orchestra behind me were also asked to play their instruments. We should have organized a flash mob.
That is incredible. You should have been like, Brahms violin concerto, violins.
Yeah, no kidding. I just wonder what the other people going
Don Juan, give me
thought.
a break.
They're like, what's happening?
They were just doing it for fun at that point. They were just bored.
Like, why is Jillian playing a guitar?
Thank you, Stephanie and Jillian. Those were incredible. And thank you, Jackie. That was amazing. I'm so glad my lame story reminded you of your epic story.
Specializing in the finest assortment of oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and their accessories, RDG Woodwind serves musicians around the world. Their employees are all professional musicians who have a deep knowledge of the products that they sell. RDG's repair shop has an international reputation with a combined 100 plus years of service among the 5 repair technicians. Plain and simple, RDG provides excellent products and fabulous customer service. Visit them at rdgwoodwinds.com. They look forward to working with you.
Chemical City Double Reeds is a full-service double reed shop specializing in the sale of instruments, cane, accessories, and sheet music. Double Reed Dish listeners can enjoy free shipping with code DRDISH. Visit them in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or online at www.chemicalcityreeds.com.
We are delighted to welcome to Double Reed Dish James Ryon, professor of oboe at the University of North Texas. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We love to get to know our guests by starting off having them tell us how they began to play their instrument. So when did you start the oboe and what made you choose it?
Well, I started in the 8th grade. My parents gave my sister a flute to learn, and she hated it. And so I inherited it. And in the 7th grade, I was stuck playing the flute because we had the instrument. And I was probably the worst flute player there, and I disliked the instrument so much that I was looking for any alternative. So at one point, we watched Leonard Bernstein with the Young People's Concerts. This immediately dates me, of course. And I thought, wow, the oboe. There's Harold Gomberg playing the oboe, and it looks like the hardest thing in the world. And as it turns out, my father actually was a sax player in high school, but he was also given the oboe. And he had described it as the hardest thing in the world. In fact, I remember his description of trying to play it. It was and I thought, all right, there's so many flute players around, and I just got to get away from this. So I'm going to play this instrument. And so my parents said, okay. And in the 8th grade, our band had an oboe that I was given. It was an instrument that had been sitting around for years. And they found me a teacher, Sergeant Robert Hole, Principal Oboe of the U.S. Army Band, who actually had studied with John Mack when John Mack first came to the Cleveland Orchestra many years ago. Anyway, Robert Hole was terrific. He was about a half hour away from our house, and he was a very fine oboist, and we were living in the D.C. area because my father was in the Navy and stationed in Washington, D.C., and we would hear the Army Band at Watergate, and I would study with him on a weekly basis, and he was a terrific teacher. He also taught oboe lessons in the basement of his house in Arlington. And the basement was so filled with junk that there was this very, very narrow path that you had to thread, go down the stairs and thread the path to the corner of the basement where he had his reed desk and his music stand and where he taught his lessons. And of course, the floor was just strewn with reed shavings and all kinds of stuff. And I remember just one story vividly. He used to beat time with a baton. And it was very precise, click, click, click. One day I'm sitting there playing and there's a fly that comes and lands on his reed desk. And the fly was being a nuisance. And at one point I'm playing and he takes his baton and goes, flat, splits the fly in half. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. And of course he looked at me like, oh yeah, sure, I do this every day. I'm sure it was a once in a lifetime event. But anyway, so I started playing the oboe, and finally, I think after the first year, bought my own instrument and continued playing, and was able to, as a high school student, play with the Air Force Band and the Navy Band. The Air Force Band and the Navy Band. I played Swan of Tuonela with the Navy Band and a Handel concerto with the Air Force Band. And these were very nice arrangements, and at one point, many years ago, I thought, well, it'd be nice to try to find those arrangements for band because they're really good. And, it'd be a great opportunity for oboists to play with these bands. Well, as it turns out, they're all proprietary. They will not, they have full-time arrangers that do nothing but arrange for the bands. Oh. But they stay with the bands. The bands, I believe, I'm not sure about this, but I don't believe the bands share their arrangements with each other. So I remember those arrangements and how lovely they were, but they're not generally available. I'm sure that they're still there with those service bands. At any rate, that's how I came to start the oboe. And if you want me to go on about, I went to Yale thinking that I was going to be a physics major. Before, actually, Robert Hole passed away at some point in my high school career. I'm not sure exactly when that was, but I then started studying with someone who played in the Kennedy Center Orchestra, Gene Montooth, who also taught at Shenandoah Conservatory. And I saw him many years later because he had retired down in Florida. Our woodwind quintet from the University of Akron was playing a tour in Florida, and we played very close to his home, and I had a chance to catch up with him. And then I went to Yale thinking I was going to be a physics major. I ended up majoring in engineering because the physics was too much. But I was also able eventually to study with Robert Bloom, who taught at the Yale School of Music at the time, who later then went on to teach at Juilliard after his forced retirement from Yale. And I spent a year as a prospective physics major, and then the engineering department recruited me because they had so few majors at the time. At the time, the Vietnam War was going, and engineering was probably the least favored major at Yale. But I initially studied with Harry Sargas, who was a senior at the time at Yale, and went on to play principal in the Toronto Symphony, and then taught at the University of Michigan for a number of years. And then I studied for one semester with Richard Kilmer, who was finishing his DMA at Yale and freelancing in New York. And it was really Kilmer who got me to playing the oboe more seriously. It was really a semester. Richard is a terrific teacher, and after a semester, he convinced Bloom to take me on as a student, and I did. And it was after that that I was able to get into Blossom Festival and study for 2 summers with John Mack. And then I graduated with a degree in engineering, but my first job down in Florida was as an instructor of oboe. And I see on some of your questions here that they want to know how you got your first job. Well, as it turns out, it's a rather complicated story, but the University of South Florida had a big turnover. About 6 or so faculty had gone from the University of South Florida to Florida Central, and one of those people who left was the oboe professor. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on a number of the names. But at any rate, they lost their department chair and about 5 faculty, one of whom was the oboe teacher. So they went looking around for prospective oboe teachers, and my teacher at Yale got a call, and he recommended me. Of course, I didn't have a degree. I wasn't even working on a degree in music. But as it turns out, at the University of South Florida, the person they appointed as chair of the department, Nelson, a gentleman named Nelson, became the chair of the department, and he had been principal cellist of the London Philharmonic before he was hired at the University of South Florida. A very distinguished man who didn't have a degree in anything. I mean, basically, he was Australian and was a prodigy and hired by the London Philharmonic as a very young man, and stayed there for many years until he decided that he'd like to retire in Florida, and he became a cello teacher at the University of South Florida. Anyway, he was appointed in the interim as chair of the music department at the University of South Florida. He brought in, because there was a resident woodwind quintet, they were committed to finding the best player they could find. So he brought in a number of players to play with their quintet, and I was actually one of the first people they brought in. I'm not sure how many people they actually brought down. I think it may have been 4 or 5. The problem is that, not knowing the administrative protocols at the University of South Florida, Nelson Cook actually used a faculty line to pay for all the travel for people who came in and auditioned. Now, those of us who've been in academia for a while know that you don't mix those budgets. You can't take a faculty line for the expenses of a search. But Nelson didn't really understand that. He was thrown into this position very quickly, and they wanted to find oboists, so he used this faculty line to find oboists. Well, they decided eventually that they wanted me to teach there, and since I didn't have a degree in music, they were willing to hire me as an instructor of oboe, and that's how I came down to Florida to teach. At the same time, the job in the Florida Gulf Coast Symphony, which is now the Florida Orchestra, I believe, had an opening, but the principal oboist of that orchestra actually didn't leave the job for a year. So I came to Florida to teach for a year, and then the opening in the symphony opened up, and I got that job a year after going to Florida. Well, so I didn't have a degree in music. I'm teaching at the university, and the chair of the department didn't have a degree in music and had already done something that he shouldn't have done. The Florida auditor caught up with him, I think it was 2 or 3 years later.
Oh my God.
And he decided to go back to his native Australia before facing the consequences in Florida. So he left, but not before having his son, Tony Cook, hired to take his place as the cello teacher at the University of South Florida. At any rate, I'm going through this sort of involved history of my career to show that it's not typical, okay? So Tony, Nelson leaves, gets Tony hired, but Nelson leaves, and the person who takes his place has been teaching clarinet part-time at the University of South Florida, I believe, but became a full-time clarinet teacher because they had enough enrollment. Anyway, going from that position, he became chair of the department. And I think one of his salient qualifications was his familiarity with the rules. That is what you can use in which budget. Okay. But he was also quite familiar with the fact that the Department of Music needed to hire faculty that actually had degrees in music. So he was very concerned that I didn't have a degree in music, and it was clear that I was not going to advance to a tenure-track position without a degree in music. But he was very generous and kind in suggesting that I could get a leave of absence to get my master's degree at Juilliard because Robert Bloom was now teaching at Juilliard, and I could apply and most likely be accepted to get my master's at Juilliard, even without an undergraduate degree in music.
That's pretty unusual.
Well, it is very unusual. So I had been at South Florida for 3 years, and I was given leave of absence to complete my degree. In the meantime, they hired a temporary replacement for me, Jan Eberly. Jan had just graduated from Curtis, and this was, I believe, her first job, and she took over. I believe she took over in the symphony for a year, and she took over at the university while I was up in New York. The symphony gave me 1 year leave. As it turns out, the university gave me 2 years of leave. After the first year of leave from the symphony, I had to commute from New York to Florida to play the Florida, what was at the time Gulf Coast, but now Florida Orchestra. So I finished my degree at Juilliard commuting to Florida to maintain the symphony work. And the university was willing to give me 1 more year to finish the degree. So it took me 2 years to get the master's degree at Juilliard. One of the reasons it took me 2 years at Juilliard is because they didn't accept a lot of my credits from Yale, which was also an interesting situation because Juilliard has very strict academic requirements. And actually, I'm saying that somewhat facetiously. The fact is they do require English, and Yale at the time did not require an English course. So I had to take world literature at Juilliard, which was actually a very good course. And I really enjoyed it. But, it was funny because I just didn't feel that the rest of the class had the same interest in the course. At any rate, so I finished the degree at Juilliard. While I was doing that, I actually had, I went back, well, anyway, it's all fuzzy. It's a long time ago. But at some point, I went back and taught at the University of South Florida. But I also got a job playing in the Caracas Philharmonic in Venezuela. So I think I was back in Florida for a year, and then either extended my leave with South Florida. I can't remember what happened, but I extended the leave with South Florida to take the job in Caracas for a year. I came back to South Florida and yeah, all right. So I should really be looking at my resume. Somewhere in there, I actually got a job playing in an orchestra in Brazil. And my future wife was a cellist. She also got a job in Brazil. So at some point we went to Brazil for a summer to play in this new orchestra in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. The summer passed. Summer in Brazil is actually winter. I was asked to play in a beautiful old Baroque cathedral in the dead of July, and the temperature in the cathedral was 50 degrees. I couldn't afford to crack my instrument, so I told them, look, I can't play. They fired me. I later got reinstated after I explained to them that I really couldn't risk, cracking my oboe. And then at that point, I had to get back to the University of South Florida. So I had to make a decision to either stay in Brazil or go back to South Florida. The thing is that I had gotten my master's degree. South Florida had given me assurances that I would be eligible for a tenure track position after getting my master's degree. Unfortunately, the person who made that assurance, that is the clarinetist who had taken over from the cellist, he lost his job as chair of the department. So they had a new chair of the department. And the new chair of the department wasn't privy to this agreement I had about getting a tenure track position. So I'm down in Brazil, explaining to them, well, look, if I don't have this position, then, I'm going to stay in Brazil. Of course, I had just been fired from the job in Brazil, so I had to get back. So I got the job in Brazil back long enough to tell the people in Florida, look, I'm sorry, but unless you put me in as a tenure track position, I can't come back, and I have this job here. So they scrambled and gave gave me a tenure track position, so I went back to the University of South Florida. If this sounds awfully garbled, it's probably because it is getting a little scrambled in my head. But I ended up back at the University of South Florida with a tenure track position. And then, I believe a year or 2 years later, this job in Caracas came by. And of course, at this point, South Florida is looking at me like, what's going on with this guy? But the job in Caracas also hired my future wife, and so we both went to Caracas. And at that point, the University of South Florida hired Nancy Warnick, who actually had been one of my colleagues at this orchestra in Brazil. So at any rate, I actually came back to South Florida when, well, at some point, I got the job for a year as a temporary, taking the place of, I think it was Nancy, who had to go off, who got leave for a year by this time. And so I spent another year teaching at the University of Akron. All the people in the wind quintet were still there. They knew me. They thought it was a great idea for me to come back and take someone's place for a year. And during that year, I managed to get the job at the University of Akron. And then I spent 19 years at the University of Akron. I'm married by this point. I was married in Caracas. My first child was born in Caracas, Venezuela. We went to Florida for a year and then went to Akron for 19 years, where my second child was born. And my wife and I played in the Akron Symphony for, let's see, I didn't play the first year. It was the same thing. The person who had the job was there for a year. And then, so I played in Akron Symphony, I guess, for 18 years before going to LSU. And then I spent 8 years at LSU, and I've been at the University of North Texas for 9 years. And in Baton Rouge, after the first year, I think it was, Baton Rouge was the one time I actually got the job in the symphony when I got the job at the university. But I had to audition. And I was auditioning against my students, which is always a sort of strange situation, especially when they're very good players, you know.
Right.
Anyway, I'm still playing in the Baton Rouge Symphony, which unfortunately had to cancel their concert this week, as Galit knows. So we're here at home, just hunkered down. But yeah, I've been playing in Baton Rouge Symphony now for, since I guess 2003, maybe it's close to 15 or 16 years. And I commute, and it's actually easier to commute to Baton Rouge than it is to commute to Garland over on the other side of Dallas. So,
oh man,
believe it or not. Anyway, that's sort of my career in a nutshell. We played in a woodwind quintet, which is still going at the University of Akron. It's called Solaris. I think we did 2 tours of Florida and a tour of Sweden while I was playing with the group, and we put out, I think, 3 CDs. And they're still doing very well. They, in fact, played they a couple of years ago played one of my arrangements of the Stravinsky Pulcinella.
Oh, cool!
With ballet. We've done this with the Akron Symphony Chamber Group. I started with, I think, 4 movements, and I think I have 6 or 7 now of the original suite for woodwind quintet.
Is that available for purchase?
No, because it hasn't been out of copyright but I think it may be at this point. It's not available. I have a number of arrangements for wind quintet, and my latest is an arrangement of 3 works that we played with the Baton Rouge Symphony Chamber Players. It's the Ravel Tombeau de Couperin.
Oh yeah.
All 6 movements. The 4 that were originally arranged by Ravel for orchestra, and then I took it upon myself to arrange the other 2. The arrangement is for 4 winds, flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, 4 strings, string quartet, and harp. And they've been fairly successful. I thought the performance in Baton Rouge went very well. I played them at the Southern Illinois Music Festival, and I have video recordings of them on my website at North Texas. I got a grant to do the video from Texas. And I have a number of other, like the Stravinsky and some other woodwind quintet arrangements, but I haven't published them because it's just, it's not really worthwhile. Oddly enough, it's
maybe soon.
Well, maybe. There have been copyright issues, but for instance, the Ravel, the Strauss, and the Respighi. I did the Ravel, the Tombeau de Couperin, and the Strauss, a movement from his dance suite of Couperin. So there's a connection between the Strauss and the Ravel because they are both based on Couperin. And then there's, I did the second Respighi suite for ancient airs and dances, second suite of ancient airs and dances. And that has the same connection. All 3 pieces, the Strauss, the Ravel, and the Respighi, were written about the same time, within 4 years, in the early 1920s. And they all look back to older music, to music from the 17th and 18th centuries. So there's a connection between all of them. And they work fairly well. The Respighi's actually was the hardest because there are a lot of harpsichord solos that I had to translate to harp. And I needed a lot of work from my friends and colleagues, the harpists, because harpsichord is not the same as harp, and harp is very special. You really have to play the harp to know how to write and arrange for the harp. And so I've learned a lot about harp in the past couple of years because of the arrangements.
Well, I wonder if I could backtrack a little bit.
Sure.
You are a capital letters smart person with your undergraduate degree in physics and engineering. And I wonder how that translates to your reed making.
Well, first of all, smart is a relative thing. I decided to become an engineer because I didn't think I could manage as a physicist. So
that just sounds wild to my ears.
I slap at engineers or physicists or oboists. It's just,
what do engineers and physicists think about musicians?
Well, I have a very good friend who's a Russian who's head of the material science engineering at University of North Texas. And he recently became associate dean for research at the College of Engineering, which is a pretty outstanding program. His department in materials science really accounts for a good chunk of the grant money that the University of North Texas brings in. So at one point we were encouraged by our deans to set up collaborations. And I thought, okay, I've got a friend in material science. Let's figure out how to 3D print the perfect oboe reed. Okay?
Yes.
So I actually sat down with a bunch of his faculty, and one of my colleagues who was into the physical health aspects. We have a new degree in health and music at University of North Texas, and he was interested in musical prosthetics and things that have to do with assisting musicians who have health problems with their instruments. So the two of us were sitting there with about 4 engineers and talking about possible collaboration. And I brought a number of reeds in, and I put it in the oboe and said, here it is, here's what we do, and here's how we make it, here's the material. It's a vegetable matter, but it would be really nice to have something that we could recreate and not have to scrape on interminably to make our lives easier as musicians. And they were fascinated with the problem. They had never heard an oboe, most of them. They were from all over the world, from India, from China, from Russia, various places in this department of material science. And they were fascinated with the idea. They thought it'd be a possible project for one of their graduate students. Well, that was last year, about this time, and nothing's happened.
No!
But I do have a student who has his own 3D printer, and I've tried to get him interested and somehow.
He won't do it?
Well, he's exploring. He's exploring.
Oh, okay.
These things take time. You know?
We need it.
Well, for the first time ever, I had a student audition for UNT for the multiple wind program, and he played on a Leger reed, and it wasn't bad. It was I've never heard an oboe on an artificial reed sound acceptable, but this did. And I asked him, he's playing all 5 of the woodwind instruments. I asked him if he was making his own reeds. Well, he started, but nothing he had made was reliable. So he had this reed and he decided to play his audition on it. And I was impressed. It's the first time I've heard anybody play convincingly on an artificial reed. So, I think there are possibilities there, but whether I'll be involved in it or not, I don't know. I'm just learning how to make real reeds, it's
Tell us about that a little bit. How do you approach reed making, and what do you coach your students to do in their reed making?
Well, we have a reed making class, okay, and my TF is in charge of that. But I do spend a fair amount of time with reeds, but I try to get all of the basics and the routine work in this class, so I don't have to spend as much time since dealing with reeds. But it's a whole process. Basically, a lot of people come to, well, I'm sure you realize, a lot of people come to their college not knowing much, or if anything, about reed making. So we have the reed class that's part of their lesson. So they have to, until they can get 2 consecutive A's in their reed making, they have to take this class as part of their lessons, okay? And there are 2 tests in our reed class. One happens at midterm, one happens at the end. And the tests are all the same. They come in with a blank reed. It can be scraped as much as they want, but it can't be clipped yet, okay? So they come into the test. When they clip it, the timer starts. They have 10 minutes to finish it. And they can have other reeds there. If they take off a tip or something, they can start another one, but it has to happen in 10 minutes. And when they're done, at the end of the 10 minutes or before, the reed has to crow an octave C. It has to play an A at 440, and they have to be able to play 3 lines of a Barrett articulation study on the reed. So that at least it's not so hard that they can't get through those 3 lines. Okay, if they can do all of those things, they get an A. If it's somewhere less than that, they get a B or lower. If they have to start with another reed, they start with a B and go from there. Okay, so as it turns out, I've never had anybody fail the first reed test of the semester. Okay, usually with enough group effort and group sort of awareness, people can get to the point where they can make a reed that will play in some fashion. Now, the requirement is that they have to get 2 A's in a row. So they'll continue to take this course until they get an A on the midterm and the final, or the final and the next midterm, or something like that. But I've discovered that this test, which is basically, it's not original to me. I believe that John Mack and some of his students sort of came up with this idea. But it does focus the attention. That is, you really have to focus on getting things to work, being accurate. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing particularly good about making reeds fast. I mean, I actually spend a lot more time on a reed, but I can get a reed going so that I can practice on it within the 10 minutes. I do believe that it forces a student to focus. It forces them to get sufficient skill to get their reeds going quickly so they can spend more time practicing. I spent so many years, wasting time on reeds before I get around to practicing, that I have to tell my students, look, learn from my mistakes. Mm-hmm. You must practice before you start making your reeds. Otherwise, you'll never practice.
Right.
So that's the basic approach. I really do believe that the octave C, and we're going to test this now because we're not going to have face-to-face reed making classes. Right. We have to go completely on the sound, and we can look at the reeds, whatever you can see, but you can't see much. You can't see the detail on a reed. So we're going to have to go completely from audible cues on what the reed is doing when it's crowing. Now, I have found over the years that there's the genuine crow and the cheating crow. Because I remember when discussing this many years ago with John Mack, he'd say, yeah, when you crow your reed, you put your lips on the bark, And generally, you can coerce a crow out of a reed if you put your lips on the bark. I found that actually the reeds are most comfortable if they crow an octave C with your lips on the thread.
Yeah.
And I tell my students, look, put your lips on the bark because, you want to get the reed to crow. You want to get a feel for it. And the cane is going to be hard to begin with. That is, for me, making a reed is a 3-day process because the cane is constantly swelling after you've taken the bark off. So, yes, you do cheat a little bit because you want to see where the reed is going to be in 3 days after it's broken down and you've mashed it down and all those things. So the cheating crow is useful, but really I found that the reeds play with total ease and comfort if you get the octave C with your lips on the thread. But, both are valuable in terms of the process of reed making. And it's very important, to make sure that a reed is of the right opening, because once you've worked on it and got it to work, the next time you soak it up, it's going to probably be swollen and way too open. So you've got to spend most of your effort in getting it back to a point where it's not over-soaked, where the opening is correct, and then you can start from there. Mm-hmm. But I just also remember so many years, taking an over-soaked reed, what happened to it? And I started scraping on it before I've gotten it to the point where it's actually playable in terms of the amount of soaking and the opening of the reed. So that, and the fact that, when you sit around to play an audition or a master class, the tendency is to over-soak reeds because you're just sitting there. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I tell everybody, look, it's very important that you don't over-soak the reeds, that you get the opening in a position so that it crows comfortably, and you can test that by just using the reed. You don't have to play a lot of notes. In fact, it's best not to play anything, except if you're in the Texas All-State system where you get to play the first note of the piece. That's fine. But it's much better to verify that your reed crows properly, that you can get it to work without the oboe in it. And that's important. I don't think you should try to play an audition or a master class unless you make sure that your reed is ready to go. It's just very embarrassing to try to play on an over-soaked and too open reed, mm-hmm. because you won't be able to play for 5 or 10 minutes, and that's the amount of time you have for whatever you're playing for. Mm-hmm. But I think that's important. And I also have a whole system of reed exercises that I think are important for learning how to voice and to control the reed and your embouchure. And so I stress those as a fundamental technique in playing the oboe. It starts out with having a reed that crows an octave C, and then when you put it into your regular embouchure, you should be able to produce a very clear C, first octave C, on the reed, and then be able to voice it in half steps, up a minor third and down a minor third. And Mark Ostich refers to these as reed push-ups. And I think it's a very valuable exercise. And it's actually an exercise that a lot of kids are familiar with from their band warm-ups, because you'll hear the bands warming up, mm-hmm. which is a good way to start warming up the embouchure and the flexibility needed in the embouchure to voice and play in tune. So anyway, those are the basics that I feel are important with reed making and with basic embouchure. It's so much easier to deal with the embouchure. I think we're fortunate in the oboe, because unlike the other reed instruments, you really don't have this kind of self-contained unit that the oboe reed is. Even the English horn and the oboe d'amore reeds require a vocal to simulate what the oboe reed is. But with the oboe reed, you can actually play it and have a viable instrument, whereas you don't really have that so much with bassoon or clarinet or saxophone. I'm not familiar with those instruments, and I'm not sure whether any of this translates to that, but I think we're fortunate with the oboe that we really can do these exercises with just the reed and accomplish a lot, and divorce this mechanism from the issues that we have with our fingers and holding. Mm-hmm. So that's one reason I like tubes with cork on them, is because the total metal tubes just sort of drop when you put them in your mouth.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
But it's not impossible, but I think that it's just a lot more convenient to have the lighter staple when you're doing.
So you can do those exercises.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk to us about your interest and research in Brazilian music, and if there are any hidden gems by Brazilian composers you'd like to point our oboe listeners' attention to? That'd be great.
Sure. My original interest in Brazilian music stemmed from the fact that I married the daughter of a fairly prominent Brazilian composer and conductor and pianist. A gentleman's name was Walter Burle Marx. His daughter Madalena was a cellist, and she knew Villa-Lobos personally because Villa-Lobos was a personal friend of Walter Burle Marx. And in fact, Walter introduced Villa-Lobos' music to the United States at the 1939 World's Fair in New York, where he led the New York Philharmonic at the Brazilian Pavilion at the New York World's Fair in 1939. Walter also conducted the National Symphony, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Pittsburgh Symphony, in addition to the New York Philharmonic. And he's not well known as a composer, in spite of the fact that he wrote 4 symphonies and some other overtures. Later in his life, his daughter, because none of his symphonies were being performed, his daughter encouraged him to write chamber music, and he's written some really lovely chamber music for oboe, flute, and cello, a piece of divertimento, which I have published. When he passed away, I took the slow movement of his 4th symphony, which we actually premiered in Caracas, Venezuela. It has a huge oboe solo in it, and so I took it and reduced it to oboe and piano that I played at his memorial service. And that is now published by Genet. It's called Andante by Walter Burle Marx. At any rate, we were interested in playing in Brazil. So we both got a job in an orchestra in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. And then when we went and played in Venezuela for 5 years, we were actually fairly close to Brazil and went down and stayed in touch that way. Then when I came to the University of Akron, I organized a Brazilian festival on the basis of a grant in 1990, I think it was. And I went to Brazil, and with the assistance of one of Walter's good friends, José Vieira Brandão, managed to contact most of the well-known and important conductors in Brazil. I was soliciting music for our festival at the University of Akron. José Vieira Brandão has a very beautiful woodwind quintet called Divertimento. He put me in touch with Francisco Mignone, who is well known in bassoon circles for his valses. I met Francisco's wife, Josefina, who actually was featured in the IDRS Journal recently. Someone did an interview of her. Mm-hmm. When I met her, Mignone had passed away fairly recently. He wrote for Noel Devos, who is well known for actually a whole school of playing in Brazil. And I did meet Noel when I was down there. He played on the French bassoon, but made it clear to me that his students played on both French and German bassoons. He didn't have an axe to grind in any way about that. So Mignone has written some woodwind quintets. Edino Krieger has a really lovely woodwind quintet. Osvaldo Lacerda, he is a composer who lived in Sao Paulo, has written 3 really lovely quintets. The earlier ones are very characteristically Brazilian, and most of this repertoire can be found on a Brazilian music collection website at the University of Akron. I created that website. It hasn't been updated for probably close to 20 years now. But still, there's a fair amount of information and repertoire that is held mostly in manuscript at the University of Akron Library. And I suspect it's been put in deep archive by this point. If anybody's really interested in it, I think they can find it. And a friend of mine who I met at this expedition to collect Brazilian music, he was a very young composer, João Guilherme Ripper, had to ask Brandão if he could meet me because Ripper wasn't sort of on the guest list. I mean, Brandão was contacting all the best known people, and Ripper was well, I call him a kid, but he had just gotten a job teaching theory and composition at the Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, which was a big deal. There was a lot of competition for the job. To get that job, unlike in the US, candidates actually had to, on the spot, write a 4-voice fugue to demonstrate their prowess with fugue and with traditional forms. So João had won this job and had gone through all of passed these rigorous tests to get this position as a very young man at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Anyway, he came to us and he presented a woodwind quintet he had written that was called Romaria. And it was in a whole box of music that I took back to the University of Akron. And our woodwind quintet at Akron read through about 10 of these woodwind quintets. I'd like to name more of them for you, but it's a little difficult at this point. But one of them we read was this Romaria, and it so impressed the group that we decided to commission João to write another quintet for the group, which he did. It was based on the life of Joseph. And we ended up premiering this work down in Brazil for one of the Bienal festivals. Brazil is wonderful from one standpoint. Every 2 years, just about all of the musicians and composers get together for a big festival in Rio, and where they introduce all the new music and everything they've been doing. And it's a great opportunity to hear what's going on through a cross-section of Brazilian music. I don't know if that's still going on, but I suspect it is in some shape or form, but it's a great opportunity to see what's going on. So we played there. I remember our concert in the hall in the Federal University was in the warmer months. I think it was December or something, but it was 96 in the hall. And we were stripping down because we were just taking off clothes because it was just like being in a sauna. And the bassoonist was the only woman in the group, and she could only take off so much in propriety, but she was just about ready to do away with propriety because we were it was really a sauna. Anyway, that was a lot of fun, and so I still have some pieces that I do bring back. The Lacerda probably more than any of the others because it's. I played it last summer at the Class Festival with a group of faculty there, and they really enjoyed the piece. None of them had heard of it before. I believe it's published now by Genet. Genet took a lot of the music that I brought back. She got in touch with Lacerda. I think she's published several of his quintets. She may have published the Ripper Quintet. She may have published Krieger. If you look at her catalog, I think she has a specific Brazilian section, bookmark. So I think that's a very good source. There's now there is a whole publishing company based in New York dedicated to Brazilian music. They have some very interesting things. But at any rate, I organized a festival of Brazilian music at UNT my second year I was here, and we brought a woodwind quintet up from Brasilia. They played a piece that Ripper wrote for woodwind quintet and strings, and it's a very nice piece. It's there's a very limited repertoire for a woodwind quintet and orchestra, and this fits that. He also wrote a mass for quintet, soprano. Yeah, I think it's woodwind quintet, or at least winds and soprano, which is an interesting piece. He's written a number of other chamber works. Anyway, he's a very interesting and very successful composer. He's written now, I believe, 4 operas, and which have all been performed either in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. So for me, it's particularly gratifying because I met him when he was just starting out, and I've seen, how successful he's been since then, and I hope his success continues. Anyway, that's what I know about Brazilian music in a nutshell.
Thank you. That was really great. What advice would you give to a young musician who aspires to have a career like yours?
Well, I think the most important thing, and what I tell my students and their parents, is that you do music because you can't imagine doing anything else, okay? It requires that much dedication and that much, very narrow, concentrated effort. That said, how do we as teachers justify all of the students we have? Well, as long as they understand that I love music, I think it's the greatest thing that I could possibly have done with my life, that I possibly could have done something else, but I don't think it would have been nearly as satisfying as what I do. But for me, the most important thing about learning music, and the oboe specifically, is that it requires discipline and an intellectual and physical focus that requires self-mastery. My pitch, basically, is that if you can master the intellectual and the physical discipline of learning to play the oboe, you really can do anything. So that you develop these skills, you develop this self-discipline, and no matter where you end up in your career, you will have the discipline to be a success at something, hopefully something that you love doing. Okay. So from that standpoint, I do not take responsibility for finding my students work. All I can do is take responsibility for helping them to find the discipline and self-knowledge to do whatever they want to do, whatever they love to do. So that's my advice, basically, is don't worry about what you're going to do with your career. Worry about learning to play the oboe and make music as an artist to the best of your ability. Because if you do those things, and you do those things well, there's a good chance you can make a career in music. It's a big industry. If you concern yourself with all those things, and if you let, for instance, your parents concerned with your making your way in life, which is a reasonable concern. I have children of my own, and I'm delighted that they both are making their way in life in areas that I never would have suspected when they were kids, or even going to school. I can go into that story, but I feel it's illustrative of what, you do in life. You learn your skills, you get as much understanding as you can, you apply them to what you're most passionate about, and then you go about trying to make a living. And that's, I think, the best advice we can give in music, because it is such a competitive field, and there are many people who are dedicating their lives to it because they can't imagine doing anything else. And that's the reason we do it. It's hard to imagine doing anything else. So that's the best advice I can give to kids. My own kids, my son was into Asian philosophy, to martial arts, to a lot of different things. He's a sort of natural linguist. He spent a year at the University of Akron, then went to Taiwan to study political science. He taught himself Mandarin, basically, and after a year enrolled in a university in Taiwan, and then decided that he wanted to get to know Venezuela. So he spent a year and a half in Venezuela, landed a job as a Spanish Mandarin translator with a tech company. as a result of that, he decided he had an interest in business and went to business school, and then ended up getting a job with SurveyMonkey as a data analyst, but got more excited about the programming aspect of it, taught himself all the programming languages he needed to be a software engineer, and he's now a software engineer with SurveyMonkey.
Wow.
So my daughter went to the University of Chicago, majored in anthropology. She got a grant later in her career at the University of Chicago to do a study in Senegal, where she had to learn some Wolof. Senegal's national language is French. She learned French in high school. And while she was in Senegal working on this project, she contracted malaria. And malaria was so widespread, it was like having a cold. And so she decided at that point that anthropology just didn't seem relevant enough. She was going to go to med school. So she came back, she graduated from the University of Chicago. I mean, she was Juliet in a play. You know, she's also an artist. She does many different things, but she decided she wanted to be a doctor. So she had to spend 2 years at LSU taking her pre-med courses. Went to med school in Miami, is now in her 4th year of residency as a surgeon at Jackson Memorial Hospital. But when she was in college, I would never have imagined that she would end up as a doctor, okay? But whatever she did in college and whatever she did in preparing for medical school gave her the discipline to be a surgeon at this point. So I guess my main point is that do what you do very, very well, get the discipline to learn whatever you're learning, whether it's oboe or organic chemistry, and then see where your passion and your skills lead you at some point.
Jim, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was wonderful to talk to you. It was an hour. Can you believe it?
No, I can't. I'm sorry.
So that was an amazing interview. Thank you so much for joining us for that. As always, you can find us on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you can listen to us on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and everything. Jackie, it's time to end this nerd parade.
Go make reads.